Right, I've been asked by a few people about fixed spool wheels, as all my service videos are tending to be on multipliers. And do we do fixed spools? Yes, we do lots of fixed spool wheels. Personally, multipliers, you very rarely find there's anything that's not repairable with them unless it's something that's really been badly abused, and even then you can usually get the spurs, you can usually sort them out. A lot of fixed spool wheels, sadly, when they go wrong, that is it, you know, go to the great fishing beach in the sky. Common fault we do find in some of these reels is that you take the reel and when you turn the handle the spool doesn't oscillate. Now this is almost always very simple. It's a worm drive inside the reel which has got damaged. We see quite a few of them actually come in brand new in the box, which are in that state. It's basically a bad assembly. Some guy in China who's on piecework, get it done, knock it out, go for his noodle break, whatever. Not a difficult job, something that's well within the capability of anybody with just basic screwdrivers, basic intention. First of all, take the spool off. Always, always, always something to put your bits in, then you don't lose them. Okay, that comes off. Now I've got a little screw in here which you undo, which is, stops the carriage retaining nut from falling off. Comes off. I cannot stress the benefit of working on a soft cloth, that anything hits that, it stays put. When it hits a solid hard surface it tends to bounce and disappears into some sort of parallel universe, I think, because you can never find it again even when you've seen it fall. Bear in mind, a lot of fixed spool reels, this nut is a left-hand thread. These isn't. It's standard, you know, lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. But I see a lot of these reels which are destroyed because somebody doesn't realise it's a left-hand thread, just thinks it needs more brute force to undo it. Pull the flyer off. Right. Take the handle off. There's no series of screws here. Apart from this one, they're all exactly the same size and shape of screw, which is pretty unusual. Start off with the one here. Work your way around. There is nothing going to fly off, there's no springs going to disappear. Just work your way around undoing them all. Little tiny one at the bottom, different size. I've seen so many of these completely hashed up by somebody using the wrong size screwdriver. They're so fine and chewing them up. Keep stressing, right size tool for the job always. And when you've taken these screws out, the thing is held in place because there's two screws here through a rubber gasket. Now, you don't need to completely remove the rubber gasket. If you take out these three screws, now these here, leave them in place. Otherwise you have little bushes and little bearings falling out all over the place. It's really necessary. If you take these out, then I just need it to a sharp blade, just lift the rubber gasket up. Once you've lifted it up, you can then bend it out of the way. It's a soft rubber. And bend up out of the way to there, then the cover comes off. Straight away, there's your main gear. Let's just hook that bearing out. Straight away we can see the problem. The worm gear here is totally and completely mashed. That's all brass filings in there. Now, getting this out, completely easy, totally within your abilities. Undo the screw in the end here. Another small screw, and this little plate comes off. Just push in there with your pliers to start it moving. Take hold of the plate and pull it out. Note which way this plate goes in. It says it can only go in one way. It goes in with the cutout to the bottom like that, so that actually stops that bearing coming out. Now, next thing is time to mop out some of this grease, because you want to get rid of all the grease that's in here, because it's all full of fine brass filings where this is chewed up. It's also easy to work with something that's grease free. Next news, you remove these two screws here. Always with these, try not to lose these screws. It's alright for me, I've got a box for the spare ones and whatnot, but they have to be exactly the right length, the right thickness, the right thread, soft head, otherwise you have no end of trouble. Take this plate off here, and on this plate should be a small washer. Tiny, tiny little washer that's on there. Don't lose it. Now, this is the pawl, just lifts out. Now, on the pawl is a plastic spacer. The new pawl and worm kit does not come with that spacer, so save the spacer. That is scrap, the pawl. You can now pull the bars it slides on. Long one actually goes at the bottom, short one at the top. When you've pulled that, you can then move that out of the way, and you can see the state that's in. A few seconds for another clean up. Before we get it back. Now, grasp the pole with your pliers, push it out. Sorry, the worm gear. Keep that out of the way. On the end of the worm gear is a small brass bush. You will need that. It does not come with the new worm gear. That is also now scrap. You now need to get rid of all that fine brass filings. You do not want to get those in burns and bushes, so we should just pause the video, because you don't need to watch me spend 10 minutes scraping all this lot out. Right, that's everything cleaned out. Now we start the reassembly. Worm and pawl kits. Always, no matter how good the actual pawl, that's that little bit that runs on the worm, looks, you replace it. I'll keep the old pawls that come out, which often look perfectly alright, just in case I desperately need one for a service kit. Now, when you put it in, it's a plastic cog in here. Will come out. Still some of that rubbish at the back of that. God. Plastic cog, when you look at it, don't know if that focuses, it looks identical both sides. It's not. That side is absolutely flush. The side you want, the hole in it has a recess. I don't know if you can just see that there. That's actually recessed where the other side's flat. That is the side that's facing you. It's got a round hole with two flats in. The end of the worm has two flats. The way it fits is straight in like that. So what you've got to look at is when the worm's in, the worm's got to go fully in. If you put it in the other way, it ends up with the worm sticking out of it. So it goes in that way. Now, the tricky bit is you cannot put it in fitted. You've got to have this cog in the reel. Also in there is a bush and a bearing. There's a bush and the other side of that bush is a bearing. This is why I said don't take that lot out unless you're absolutely unavoidable, because everything goes apart. Right, so put the cog in, making sure the side with the recess in it is outwards. Or better still, don't even take it out. Goes in the long end through the hole there. Now this is the tricky bit. It either goes straight in or you spend the next 10 minutes fiddling about trying to get it in. But the idea is that the worm gear has to go into that cog. It has to line up with the flats in the slot in the cog, but you've also then got to get it to line up with the bearing and bush that's on the other side of that cog. Now it either goes straight in and you think, oh, that's easy, or you spend the next 20 minutes fiddling about trying to get it in. Now this looks like one of the fiddling about ones. Well, that was the result, that it slid straight in without too much hassle. Now, micro bearing goes, little bush goes in the back here. The old original Surfblasters used to use a little micro bearing in here, which seemed like a great idea, other than the fact that the little micro bearing invariably ended up getting a load of salt and rubbish in it and corroding and trashing the whole wheel. And then we all worked out that the best plan was to just put a little bush in. Bushes just whir away slowly and then cause problem. Bearings just suddenly collapse. Well, let's push the little bearing in. I find a little punch like that's just lit. Don't hit it with a punch, that's just to push it in, not to drift it. It's just to get my finger in the hole. Don't start hitting it with anything with a reel. If it doesn't go in easily, you're doing it wrong. Right. Now we put the rails in. Short one goes in the top. Fairly obvious, goes straight in with the pliers. One end's slightly smaller than the other. One end's tapered, got a shoulder on it, the other's flat. Obviously goes in, tapered end, and slides into that. At this stage, you need to replace this, which retains everything in, so everything stays together. You don't suddenly find it all fall apart. That goes in, just a little tap to push down. Now that's locking those rails, it's locking everything in. Now we make sure that that runs up and down quite happily. Next job, you take your new worm, so your new pawl, a little bit of plastic that we retained, and you place it in the hole there. Now this is why these get damaged in the factory, because they pull it in, screw the cover down, it's not lined up properly. First time you turn the reel, it chews it up. The thing to do is to push your thumb on that and then gently turn the actual reel until you feel that drops in. You suddenly feel it go click, and that pawl has now dropped straight into the worm and it's now driving. Right, now that little tiny micro washer that's with this plate, that goes on top of the pawl. And make sure it's seated in the actual hole, not on the edge of it. If I didn't have a magnetic screwdriver there, it would be a lot easier. Right, that has to be seated properly in that hole there. This plate is fairly obvious because it's shaped. Got a curved edge here, curve on there, so it goes that way around. Right. Now, when I'm doing these, I just chuck all the screws in a heap in a dish so they don't get lost, because I know which screws go where, because I've done a few of these. I would very desperately advise you to lay the screws out on a piece of paper, even go to the point, I put them on a piece of white paper, I'm making a note where each one goes. Because you put the wrong screw in, it usually jams the works, and it's when you put it all back together you find you put the wrong screw in, works ain't moving, oh dear. Right, this bearing goes in underneath there. It's quite a nice tight fit. Just push it in. Right. Now the one part has a habit of flying out is this little V-spring. What that does is stops the anti-reverse flopping about. At this stage you now want to lubricate it. Now, I've never been a believer in getting all this fancy, expensive, special wheel grease. I mean, you know, bit of Vaseline, bit of PTFE grease, bit of silicone grease. Vaseline's a perfectly good grease. It's also relatively clean. You don't end up with your fingers looking like you've been doing a day down the coal mine when you finish doing it. Just plenty of grease in there. Put the lid on. Just keep it tidy. Right. Now put the main gear in. Now this little V-spring here is one of the few bits that falls out. It's designed to provide a spring for your anti-reverse thing, stop it keep flopping about. It goes in V-point downwards into this groove here. And it does not usually like to stay in. Push it in and it will keep springing back out. While it's located, when you put the cover on, the cover will press it down into place. Fold that rubber washer back out of the way. Make sure that's sitting square. Put your cover on. Jiggle it about until it sits home. Again, if it does not sit down quickly and smoothly like that, it's wrong. Make sure that's working. Pull that rubber thing. Now when you're at this stage, get a screw in. You know, where you've got it all together. Nothing's going anywhere now. Now this is a Penn Surfblaster 2. It's an 8000 size. It also comes as a Surfblaster 2 7000 size. It also comes as a Surfblaster 3 7 and 8000 size. Basically they are identical. The only real difference is the actual colours of the body and the colour of the spool. The Surfblaster 3 is all black with that bit of gold trim. The 3 is this silver grey. Internally there's absolutely no difference and the components are all interchangeable, same thing. Now don't forget the little screw here. Keep a good pressure on with these little screws, because when you let the screwdriver slip that it chews up the head. Just check them all down. Don't over tighten, just do them so they stop turning. Right, now you've got this little plate at the back here. Now I tend to, with these plates, put a little bit of grease in there. Yeah. Can only go on one way round. Right. We now have 3 screws to put back in to hold the rubber gasket in place. You find getting these screws in a right pain. I do as well, so you think being a rubber gasket you can just press them into the rubber and it will stay put where you get a screwdriver on them. No. Again, don't over tighten them, because you can do as you're compressing the rubber. Excuse me. When it's open, a little squirt of grease around there, can't do any harm. Flyer goes back on. Do be careful with this nut in here not to cross thread it. It's easily done. You cross thread it, you totally destroy the main gear. Tighten it up, literally just a hand tight. Now this thing is to stop the nut coming unscrewed. You see there's a slot in it, there's 2 holes in there for screws. Drop it over so it sits on the nut and there's a screw hole. Now putting this screw in can often be a little bit tricky. The way to do it is to get a bit of blue tack on the end of your screwdriver, fix the screw to the end of your screwdriver with blue tack. That holds the screw where you get it in place. Otherwise you're going to be fiddling about forever trying to drop it in, turn it round and all that. And that's on, that's to be sort of nut. Now that is basically it. That sits on the bottom of the clicker cog. That pushes on, that can be quite tight sometimes. That's on. Spool goes on. Drag nut goes on. Put the handle in. Then spool's going up and down, wheels happily winding both ways. See the odd weirdie where spool actually oscillate when you're winding forwards and won't oscillate backwards. Make sure the anti-reverse is locking out. Yes it is. Just drag. Job done. Perfectly and simply with any reasonable person's capabilities to do. The worm and pole kit retails for around about £22 to £23. if you're going to pay me to do it, I'm probably going to charge you 15 or 20 quid to actually fit it, which makes it an expensive option. Mind you, these reels are now well over £100 to buy new, and that's at discount. I think the recommended retail is something ridiculous, like 170, 180 quid, but you buy them 120, 130 quid all day long. I even find some people selling them at no profit for sort of 80 or 90 quid. But it's well within capability of doing it. There's nothing frightening, there's nothing going to fall apart. Yeah, it's only when you start taking this apart that springs go everywhere. Simple, easy job for you to do.